I am not exaggerating when I say this. The cards coming in September in Marvel Snap could change the face of Marvel Snap as we know it forever. First up is the Season Pass card Symbiote Spider-Man. Now, as usual, we are relying on data mines for this information. However, we are close enough to the time of release that I do expect these cards to release as data mined. There is one big caveat here, and it is visible on Symbiote Spider-Man: the new keyword activate. Activate appears to be a button that you press that is on the card that does a thing when you press it. I am going to be operating under the following assumptions when evaluating activate cards. Assumption number one: you can time activates whenever you want. We do not know if this is true, and I think this is the thing I'm going the furthest out on a limb on. But my understanding of how these cards are worded means that it makes the most sense if you are able to, say, play a card, then activate a card while you are still in the staging phase of your turn, meaning that that card will then activate after the other card is revealed. This matters for Symbiote Spider-Man for obvious reasons. Assumption number two: I'm going to assume you can only activate once per game, because otherwise a lot of these cards would be so broken that even, I think, the most cynical of people would not look at them and say they are reasonably releasing them. And finally, I am assuming that basically they function like, imagine old Nightcrawler or old Jeff. You are going to be able to do them, but you're only going to be able to do them once. Even if you bounce the card, you are still going to be able to only move it once. That is, imagine Jeff has an activate, you can move this basically. And of course, you cannot move Nightcrawler and Jeff when they are face down. Ergo, I'm assuming that you need to have the card face up on the board in order to activate it. With those assumptions out of the way, Symbiote Spider-Man is effectively bigger absorbing man with a little bit more restriction and a little bit more power. Now, what this also does, the first combination of cards that comes to mind for me with this is you can use this as a sort of second Wong or second Shuri in various decks. This to me reads like a Phoenix Force combo card, a Wong combo card, a card that is going to do things that go over the top of other things in the metagame. One of the scariest things that this card seems to be able to do is to combine with Black Panther and Nimrod to great effect. If you are, for example, a deck like Phoenix Force that is willing to play Nimrod, you can play out your Symbiote Spider-Man, play your Nimrod, merge the Symbiote Spider-Man with the Nimrod, and suddenly you have a 12-power Nimrod, which you normally only had Shuri to get access to. We've seen other decks that are able to include multiple triggers for their broken draws go from not so great to very good very quickly. And Symbiote Spider-Man does seem like he'd be able to do that for Nimrod decks. With Black Panther, of course, Symbiote Spider-Man represents, as far as I can tell from the wording, if you go Symbiote Spider-Man, Black Panther, Arnim Zola, merge the Symbiote Spider-Man before you play the Zola, you end up with 56 power in the other two lanes. Now, of course, this is like very like face-up obvious combo type stuff. There's counterplay available, like clogging something. This card is actually uniquely vulnerable to clog strategies because it is targeting the lowest cost card. Rocks cost 1, White Widow Bites cost 0, the Acid Arrow from Kate Bishop costs 1. So you are going to be able to meaningfully interact with this, but the face-up power of this card is going to be very high. Another possible combination of things you can do with this card includes Galactus. As I understand it, since On Reveals will re-trigger when this card is merged, you could do something like Symbiote Spider-Man into Hobgoblin. Hobgoblin goes over, play Galactus, merge with Symbiote Spider-Man, 11 power Galactus, they have -8. That seems pretty strong to me. But like most things with Symbiote Spider-Man, it does seem to have a sort of built-in anti-counterplay when you have the ability to clog your opponent. Now, clog sub-themes have already been quite powerful in current Marvel Snap. There are White Widows in many decks, there are Vipers and Hoods, There are, of course, debris that show up. There are Annihilises. There are many, many options, including probably the most played 2-drop, Kate Bishop, giving you a clog card a decent amount of the time. This card could be one of those fragile but very powerful when it works combo decks. It could take multiple of those decks to the next level by providing a backup to the Wong in the Panther Zola deck and a backup to the Shuri in the Shuri Nimrod deck. Or it could end up boosting those decks, but ultimately falling short in the face of Clog. So the real question for me then is, does this card succeed outside of that niche? Is it just a combo card that has this sort of weakness to Clog? Does it have the same matchup profile as Galactus? Does it mostly go in those combo decks? Or is this a card that you just play in a good cards deck and you're like, I love getting free stuff? If it becomes a card like that, then suddenly Shadow King gains some prominence, because as I understand the way merges work, they are still vulnerable to Shadow King. This, however, merges, like which direction the merge goes, I think does matter, because I think what should happen is it merges into SSM, which means that if you're merging with something pretty small, Shadow King's not going to do a lot. But if, for example, let's say one of the combinations that comes to mind for me is you go Sage SSM, very big guy, but very vulnerable to Shadow King. And so you end up in a situation where that kind of play strikes me as what will be the most likely kind of thing to happen. Imagine you have a Symbiote Spider-Man somewhere. It's the only card in the lane. It's the final turn of the game. You invest Sage there. Then you time the activate to go off after Sage, which I assume would be like play Sage, then press whatever button on Symbiote Spider-Man does that. Again, I am assuming that's how activate works. That might change. It might not be what it is. It might just be wrong, but that is my assumption, so I'm going to operate under those conditions. You should be able to do something like final turn, double your on reveal that gains power. And that, I think, might be the thing that makes SSM really relevant. Of course, as always, that's still vulnerable to Clog. All of this stuff requires specific board setups because SSM only merges with your lowest cost card. So when you get in situations where there are other cards that it would take over, it's not actually doing what you need it to do. It's not doing what you put it in the deck to do. So my big question for this card is there going to be enough Clog to make this card unreliable, or is it just going to be completely bonkers from day one? I expect to see a lot of ridiculous SSM screenshots on day one. First up in the spotlight caches, according to the data mines, is Silver Sable, a 1/1 with an on-reveal ability that steals 2 power from the top card of your opponent's deck. This is a 1/5 or 1/7, depending on how many times you bounce it. If you play fast, it ends up getting very easily to 1/7 in stats. I have noticed that there has been a consistent issue when it comes to new cards in Marvel Snap, which is it's very hard to make one-cost cards that are compelling and appealing. I almost said compelling and appealing there. Nice job, KM. Now, this card is compelling and appealing, right? This is a powerful, limited scope bounce card, effectively. This card is made for one archetype, and it is meant to specialize in that archetype. This is a bounce card. It is, to me, one of the better bounce cards in the game. I personally see a lot of people playing Rocket Raccoon. If I were able to do so, I think most of the time I would replace Rocket Raccoon in those bounce decks with Silver Sable. That -2 to your opponent's deck might not matter, but the +2 to your card without having to read the Rocket Raccoon perfectly, I think will. Now, it is, I think, likely a lower upside play than Rocket Raccoon. Hit a Rocket Raccoon once, bounce it, suddenly you're looking at 9 power on the final turn of the game. You only hit that with Silver Sable if the -2s on your opponent's cards matter. But honestly, I might be going out on a limb here. I expect the -2s on your opponent's cards to matter. I don't know how many times you guys have been double Cassandra Nova'd, but it sucks really bad to actually play any of those cards. -2 is, and I know this sounds stupid, 2 times bigger than -1. And I realize, again, that sounds stupid and obvious, but until you feel it, I don't think you're going to get it. I think this card is legitimately strong and should provide a meaningful boost to the bounce archetype. I don't particularly see it going anywhere else. I know there are going to be people who are like, oh, I'll play it in High Evolutionary. I'll play it in, whatever other deck I'm playing, like Ajax. I don't think it makes sense in those contexts. Those decks, when you're doing like High Evolutionary Abomination, you want maximum affliction. When you're doing Ajax, you want maximum affliction. You don't want these small ball affliction things. And the more you invest in affliction, the more vulnerable you become to Luke Cage. Part of the upside of this card is that it gives you an affliction sort of sub theme in your bounce deck. You don't actually have to do a ton to get it. So like if you're already playing Ajax Bounce, sure, it's a free include. You get Cassandra, you get this, you get Hazmat. But what's really making your Ajax huge is gonna be the Hazmat, not this stuff. It's just kind of there and helpful. Whereas if you invest super hard into this by playing it in like High Evolutionary or whatever, you end up paradoxically more vulnerable to the counterplay like Luke Cage. I do think this card is going to be fairly good. I think it probably ends up being something close to a bounce staple. And the real question for it is that going to be enough to have a reasonable play rate in a world where, you know, people have a bunch of Sandmans, people are willing to deal with bounce in sort of very powerful ways. Like you could very easily construct a Sandman Alioth deck that does not give bounce a lot of chances. I'm interested to see what this card does to the archetype, and I'm interested to see how the metagame responds to that, because I do expect it to be one of the best options in a bounce deck. All right, so here's where shit gets really, really scary. Madam Web is a 2/1 with an ongoing ability that moves a card away from this location once per turn. Every move card in the game is designed on the theory that every card that moves it only happens once and requires that other card consistently to make it happen. They are balanced according to this fact. Whenever that is able to be broken, like with Phoenix Force, it ends up creating something that is competitive level. I personally believe that Madam Web and the next card to be released after her, Arana, will make Move Bounce a metagame powerhouse level deck. Move Bounce is already pretty damn good. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but it's already like kind of a good deck that does some very consistently powerful things, whether those things be giant dagger into Taskmaster, giant human torch into Taskmaster. Honestly, those are pretty much the things that it does, but that's a really strong thing to do. Now, the deck does have fundamental weaknesses. It's not great into clog stuff. It's not bad into clog stuff. It is a bounce deck. It's not overwhelmingly amazing into things that are able to meaningfully disrupt it with cards like Sandman, with cards like Alioth. But it is a deck that once it gets this tool, I think will create a you must be this tall to ride situation in the metagame, where it is just going to be very large and very present. I don't really think people get how strong doing something like this is. Being able to, move a card out and set up the perfect lane for your beast, or move a card out, bring it back with Ghost Spider, move it out the next turn, then you bounce it. Just like there's so much strong stuff happening when you have the ability to do this stuff for free. Every one of those cards, Human Torch and Dagger and Vulture, they were all balanced around one-time procs. They were balanced around you need to use a full card to move this one time, and you don't get to repeat it. When you are able to repeat that stuff and get your cards back with something like Beast, or not have to invest more cards with something like Phoenix Force, you end up with meta-relevant decks. This is Beast and Phoenix Force for this deck. It is just a monstrous card. I am very scared of this because I personally truly dislike playing against a deck like Move Bounce. Move Bounce plays out in such a way where it is very much just guess where they're going and figure out if you can beat it. And if you guess right, you will win, and if you guess wrong, you will lose. And it turns so many games into pure 50-50s. Do they have it? Where are they going? Where am I playing Alioth crap, right? I dislike that. I really, really do. And I think that this card and the next card will provide a meaningful boost to that archetype in a way that will be fun for a little bit, but will eventually come to a point where other people are like, oh my god, I hate the final turns against this deck so much. That said, it is also a kind of skill cap deck. Move Bounce is a very difficult deck to play. It's the kind of thing that previously it's not been super worth investing in learning move bounce, right? Like it's not like, oh my god, I need to learn to play move bounce because if I invest in it super hard and I specialize in move bounce, I'll have a 70% win rate. That's not really going to happen. It might now. Though like now the payoff is really there for hyper investing in like learning this deck. I feel like this is scary. This is a scary card and I think her web might connect us all. Like, I am legitimately scared of this card. I do like that it went from being a 2/3 to a 2/1, but that strikes me as like the minimal amount of nerfs you could do to their original design of this card, which is the same card at a 2/3. At 2/1, it's like, okay, I don't have priority. I can get Red Guardian, which might be an important piece of counterplay to this card. But honest to God, this card is legitimately scary because it breaks what move cards were designed on, which is you have to invest a full card in moving this, and you don't get to repeat playing that card in moving this card. You get a bunch of moves for free when you play this card, and getting up to 4 moves for free with the power of the move payoffs that we have, Human Torch, Vulture, and Dagger, is a really big deal. My evaluation of Arana rests on a couple of the assumptions that I've made, and I think the most important one is the assumption that you can't activate multiple times per game by bouncing a card. I assume that because of the way Jeff and Nightcrawler work. Like, this is my assumption based on how other one-time abilities in the game work. If this is explicitly a multi-time ability, then I guess, this card is actually completely busted. But I don't think you can realistically look at this card and say activate is a multi-time ability, because if it was, this card would be the best card in the game by a massive degree. If you could just give 2+2 to every card you played, that would be the best card in the game for a 1-drop. You are effectively talking about a 1/11 for free that is also moving stuff. There's absolutely no way that they decided this was an okay thing to do. Ergo, my assumptions, again, like this is sort of looking at SSM, looking at Arana and saying, what is like the logical reason for why these cards would have the cost and power that they do and have the ability that they do? What does that tell us about how Activate works? I think this card tells us it's once per game. Because if this card is not once per game, it's kind of ridiculous. If you are able to bounce this card, it's kind of ridiculous because then it's just better Forge. Although there is, potentially there is like, justification for it not being better Forge. This also, like, it could be, it's only face up. Forge gets to happen more often. But my read on these cards is this is a once per game kind of thing. And I don't think we're going to be able to break that by bouncing it. Which means Arana is actually a very unique card in that, yes, it is obviously a very good bounce card. That is just a great bounce card to have. But it's also a bad top deck in bounce, like a really bad top deck. If you top deck an Iron Fist or a Ghost Spider on turn 6, you can use them. If you top deck an Arana, that's a 1/1. So like this has a different sort of profile to Iron Fist and Ghost Spider. This is a more snowbally early card. You hit a Human Torch with this, it's the best thing possible. You hit other stuff with this, it's like maybe a little bit better than like Iron Fist or Ghost Spider. If you draw this late, it's unplayable. And so you end up in a situation where a lot of the way people play bounce right now involves late power explosions with Ghost Spider, with Iron Fist, beasting and stuff like that. This card I don't think does that. Here's the other thing that it does do though, is make your Human Torch so completely insane. Again, this is like about the timing, I suppose. But my read on this card is Arana Human Torch is 8, right? That's a really big deal. The earlier you get your Human Torch ramped up, the better it is. Arana Human Torch, move it a couple more times, pick it back up, play it out, copy it with Taskmaster, 32 power in 2 lanes pretty easily. Like, this is a recipe for 32 power in 2 lanes with a Taskmaster and a Human Torch a lot of the time. And this is the kind of stuff that's really scary to me about the move bounce deck. Is it just like, well, I guess I better Eliath the Taskmaster. I guess I better play Sandman. I hate it. I hate that stuff. I really hate how when final turns get sort of filed down into that point, it's not my favorite thing in the world. However, Arana, unlike Madam Web, does, I think, have some utility elsewhere. Arana can go in Deadpool decks. Aranya goes with whenever you have a thing that you're trying to scale up. And, in move decks, obviously, it's more natural fit for Human Torch, right? I think this could be a Deadpool card. I think this card might be better than Hulkbuster in a Deadpool deck because it is cheaper and you are able to apply it whenever. You do not have to have these specific conditions like only Deadpool in the lane, like with Hulkbuster. You can just make it happen whenever. And I think that kind of change is a meaningfully powerful one. And I like what they're doing with Aranya. I expect her to be a boost to destroy decks because, in addition to all of that, she is also an extra thing that you can kill off in order to get extra power on your Carnage or to get extra discounts on your Death. So you are going to be able to benefit by getting the power on there and then also benefit on the back end by making your Carnage bigger and your Death cheaper. So you end up in a situation where she ends up sort of replacing old Forge in the deck. And I think that's kind of nice. She requires some planning out so you can make sure your Deadpool gets in the right location so you can blow it up. I like it. I like the card. This also, interestingly, because it moves to the right, if you're playing this in whatever deck that doesn't normally have access to it, some of the time the right location is going to be inaccessible, and this is just going to give you, like, effectively a Jeff that you are able to just include in your deck whenever. I'm excited to see what this card can do. What I'm afraid of course, is, 32 power Human Torch Taskmaster. Obviously, 64 power is even worse. That's the stuff I think she's actually going to do. And that's the stuff that I'm really scared of. But hopefully, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I think the number one thing you should take away from this is I'm very scared of move bounce. And I hope that we are able to meaningfully create counterplay to that deck. Because otherwise, I honestly do think it will run a lot of stuff over. Being able to drop 64 power in 2 lanes on the final turn of the game is not the kind of thing most decks can beat. It just isn't. Finally, Scarlet Spider, a 4/5 with an activate that says add an exact clone of this to another location. However, data mines have found a Scarlet Spider clone token which does not have the activate. So my assumption for this card is it is not activate, add another one that you can activate that like keeps going forever. It's not that. It just copies itself once, I think. So under that assumption, this card is still very strong. That's a 410. You're describing a 410. If you forge it, that's a 414. If you Shuri it, that's a 420. Powerful card. I think this card is just a great on-rate stat stick. The question is there going to be room for that? Do we want that out of our 4s? How many decks are playing this? What other synergies are they able to fit in? Are we going to be like Elsa Bloodstoning it? Is that a meaningful thing to do to get it to a 4/7, copy it over to make another 4/7? It feels like this card should be extremely strong, but at the same time, we just got done talking about decks that put 64 power in 2 lanes, and it's just like, oh, okay, I don't know how we beat that. This card could very easily, to me, be a Sandman card. Now, keep in mind the current weakness of Sandman decks seems to be the 4 slot. Like, when you're not playing, or even when you are playing a Patriot Sandman deck, you just end up in a situation where it's like, oh, okay, I play Patriot on 3, I play Blue Marvel on 5, I play Ultron on 6. What am I doing on 4? So, in non-Patriot decks, that's even more pronounced. You're playing like, Captain Marvel or whatever. I think this card definitely goes into Sandman. I think that Sandman might be a meaningfully powerful thing to do against bounce decks, and I think that bounce decks are going to need to have some real counterplay for this. I think that this card curving out into Sandman is just a very powerful thing to do. You just play, think about it, right? Cassandra Nova, 3/6, 4/10, Sandman, Ultron, Dunzo, right? Like, it's just what Sandman wants is just the biggest power plays you can possibly get every single turn. This card is probably the biggest power play that 4 drops will have, even without investing in it overly. And I do wonder how good investing in it is going to actually be, because I think that the way you're going to want to play this is just, this is my 410 across 2 locations. I enjoy that. I can't think of good ways to buff it meaningfully that don't require warping the deck to degrees that I don't necessarily want to do. I am interested to see how this card actually plays out, because on base, it's just strong. This is just a strong card. A powerful, unique effect that honestly I expect we'll see a lot of, but might be more limited to a deck that can actually afford good fours. An example, Gwenpool seems like a card that really wants to be paired with this. You get a couple procs on here, suddenly it's a 4/18, but in order to do that, you need the Gwenpool on 4. Like, that's the kind of warping the deck that I'm willing to do for this guy. I'm not necessarily willing to be like a Shuri Scarlet Spider deck. I am willing to play a good card in my good cards deck where sometimes he's like a 419 and the rest of the 418 and the rest of the time he's a 410. I'm already happy with the 410. The 418 is just a bonus. I don't want to put myself in a situation where I have to get the 418 if I want to win anything, right? I do think this card is going to be pretty damn good. I think that the baseline rate on it is quite powerful, but I also think it seems to be a little overhyped to me. That said, baseline rate very good. It's hard to fit 4-drops into good cards decks, but this card I think is good enough that it will make it into a lot of decks. I would not be surprised to see Athena decks rocking some Scarlet Spiders. I would not be surprised to see people trying Elsas to make those Scarlet Spiders bigger. I would not be surprised to see like some Elsa Gwenpool Athena things. I would not be surprised to see this card in Sandman. What I really question about those decks is, can they survive what seems to be the potential onslaught of move bounce in the world that we're going into? I'm interested to find out. So, pretty clickbaity title, right? But honestly, I believe it. This is the scariest season that they've done that I can remember. There are more cards in here that I am scared of than they have ever made before. This is a season that will change Marvel Snap forever. And I think people are going to read this title and be like, oh, he's talking about Activate. I'm not. I'm talking about Madam Web. I'm talking about Arana. I'm talking, like, those cards are really scary to me. I'm talking about the combo potential of Symbiote Spider-Man. I'm talking about the potential for Scarlet Spider to just be the new best in slot 4. There's a lot of really ridiculous stuff coming out this month that is going to change a lot about this metagame. I'm excited to see it, but I'm also pretty apprehensive because honestly, if you ask me to name some of my least favorite decks, they would be those turn 6 50/50 decks. I feel like Move Bounce has the potential to become one of those decks where it is just extremely scary and you are extremely obviously face up dead and you have to leave even though you don't know if they have Taskmaster or not. You just have to leave anyway. And that scares the crap out of me. I don't think that's a super fun experience for people to have. I think a lot of people are going to be like, oh, it's so skill testing, and it kind of is, but ultimately that is not my favorite way to play Marvel Snap by a long shot. It might be yours, though, and if it is, this is your season because Move Bounce scares the living crap out of me. Madam Web's web connects us all. My God, is it scary. All right, y'all, thank you so much for making it through that video. I have been Cam Best. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.